Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Matthew Rowe, and I am the CEO of the Campaign for Wool in Canada and its parent organization, the Canadian Wool Council. Thank you so much for joining us for our latest Spinning Yarn Speaker Series. The Spinning Yarn Speaker Series, of course, was created at your request to provide an insight into the work of the Campaign for Wool in Canada and the Canadian Wool Council, as well as the incredible figures that make the Canadian wool industry what it is. Our mission, of course, is to not only educate and inform consumers on the wonders of wool, but also to develop opportunities specifically for Canadian wool and the Canadians who transform it. And this is a forum where we can share all of that and give you a chance to ask your questions and learn about people who are really making a difference in the industry today and moving it forward. You're all here because you share our vision and that of our patron, that wool is the most incredible, natural, sustainable, biodegradable fiber. And so we all share this common mission to create more opportunity for it to be used in all contexts, regardless of where it comes from, but specifically to create opportunities for Canadian artisans, companies, anyone who's involved in the value chain to use Canadian wool. This is also an extra special year because we're actually just a month away from the exact 10-month anniversary of 2024 is 10 years since the Campaign for Wool was officially launched on Canadian soil by their now Majesties, the King and Queen, back then the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall, on that windy pier in Pictou, Nova Scotia. So again, stay tuned for activities throughout the year as we lead up to and beyond this year's Wool Month that are going to be emphasizing that 10 years of making a really tangible difference in knitting together the entire Canadian wool value chain. Today we have a speaker who is sort of an embodiment of kind of the ethos that we advocate for, and has really taken a lot of what we have dreamed about and some of the research that we've done, things like that, and has taken the bull by the horns and run with it in terms of not only building a business, which is a hard enough thing to do on its own, but building a business that uses Canadian wool, which is a much higher hurdle, as many of those on this call who have done the same know. So we're here. Jobair Jaber is funny enough. We were actually, before we even knew each other, we were connected by mutual friends. But as soon as Jobair came into our orbit, we knew that he had the exact sort of mentality that we try to encourage across the value chain here in Canada. And he's here to tell us more about his business journey and his efforts to make a go of it with Canadian wool in beautiful and tangible products through his brand, Milo and Dexter. So I'm not here to steal all your talking points. I know Jane always says, usually in my intros, I often will take her best speaking point. So I want to, not to call you out, Jane, of course, but I want to leave you to share the all the great material that you have for us without any further ado from myself. So happy to hand over to you, Jobair, to tell us all about Milo and Dexter and your journey with Canadian wool. Jobair.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I appreciate the warm welcome, and it's an honor to really be speaking amongst all of you enthusiasts. Yeah, I'm going to give kind of a historic viewpoint of the young company that I started a few years ago. And again, as I said before, if anyone has an ongoing burning question that they want to jump in so we can delve into it in more detail, let's do that, because in theory, it's a very unstructured sort of talk about my journey and the journey of the company and how we really stumbled into the wool industry and how now we're 2 years into it, really making great strides to sort of be more involved in it. So if we could maybe jump to the presentation, Lydia. Perfect. Amazing. So the story really starts in Montreal back in 2019, and we started the brand Milo and Dexter. In its first form, it was really born with the tagline of "Aesthetics Made to Last." It was to create a brand, a concept that would tackle issues that we saw in the fashion industry around overconsumption, the mental exhaustion of also seeing all these trends that come and go, and the decision fatigue people go through when they go to buy garments and they buy clothing, and not knowing what is good quality, what's bad quality, why are things priced very high, why are luxury items priced very high, but maybe not have very good quality. So that was one of the angles. Of course, ethical labor was something that we cared about a lot as well. And being in Montreal, which has a historic garment industry that has still stayed relevant, has allowed us to sort of appreciate that, especially with all the offshoring that we've seen globally and all the global brands who've come up, in the news articles about, having issues with where they were making things, and obviously the ripple effects that happen after that. But of course, we also wanted to keep it accessible, and that was a big point of the initial form of the company and the initial products we made. So when we started, we started as manufacturers, really. We started by making our own stuff. So we set up our factory here in Chabanel. We really started as in the basis of doing products that last a long time, that have minimalistic features in their design. So if we jump to the next slide here, I think yeah, so there was this evolution from aesthetics made to elastic Canadian-made goods. Maybe next slide as well. So you can start to see some of the initial items that we were doing. This is our first factory. We've now are still in the same building, but we've just moved a few floors now. We're taking up more space in the building. But if you go to the next slide, you'll see some of the items. So it was really basic, minimalistic clothing. The idea was around a capsule collection, all the items you need to operate in your day. And back then, honestly, and I mean, looking back, it's kind of funny that we chose this, but when we did our initial product development and research, we ended up going with materials that were completely man-made and synthetic. So we were using acetate, which is a fiber that many luxury brands were using because of the durability features, the touch of it. And we thought of, when we thought of a product development, we were thinking, how can you keep this garment from lasting as long as possible? So from the design side, how do you keep a garment very timeless, using classic silhouettes, but also using fibers that supposedly will last a long time, right? Of course, as we delved deeper and deeper into the industry and got involved with testing our products, we realized that was kind of a bit of a misconception. And we at some point decided to start testing with wool. We were doing a lot of suiting at the time, and we started to bring in wool from a mill in Italy that had very similar properties, which we were surprised about. They had the stretchiness, the breathability, the durability. So we were like, oh, why were we being told by all these suppliers of ours that you need plastics, you need man-made fibers to get the same level? Of course, at the same time, because we were a manufacturer, we were also coincidentally pushed into the uniform business too. So we were still servicing contracts in the hospitality industry, in the restaurant industry, that required durable items. And the existence of, especially when it comes to knitwear, of yarns in Canada that we were exposed to were primarily in the acrylic world, which again has been marketed as very durable and having long-lasting properties. But of course, it's been cost that has really been the main interest of why that has become so frequented in the industry that we're in. And of course, so with time, we did a lot of soul searching, you could argue. And when we started to switch into the wool material for suiting, we started to realize, oh, wow, there's a lot of great properties here. Again, we were very novice in the sense of we knew what we wanted to do. We had the same sort of value pillars, but of course we were, we're having conversations with people in the industry. And at the time, many people in the industry, in at least where we were heavily pushed towards the man-made side of fibers. And when we made the effort to start bringing in, importing our own suiting fabric, that was kind of our initial, entrance into this. But of course, that started to raise questions. Okay, if we want to go local, we're already locally manufacturing. We're already, doing as much as possible to be a part of a supply chain that we can see. So the next question that, came to us was, okay, why can't we start, why is there no wool in Canada? We see sheep everywhere, roaming the fields when we're in the countryside on vacation or traveling around. So when we started doing initial research, we found that there's a high number, like a high population of sheep in Canada. So why don't we have the same, materials that the British have, that the Italians are bringing in? I guess the Italians to some extent are just processing it. but still, there's a lot of, wool that's available, or sheep that's available in Canada. So why can't we do that? So the initial discovery was really more out of inquiry as like, why can't we do this, right? So it's phone calls that I started making to our suppliers, who some of the ones who were in the industry for quite a long time remembered a time when that was still possible, and suiting wool was still made in Canada. There was yarn that was made in Canada. There was this remembrance, but also like a why though? Why would we still have that, right? It's this kind of like almost I wouldn't say mockery, but almost laughing at my questions. I'd be like, you're wasting your time. It's not worth it. If you want yarns, let's get some merino from Italy. We can still import that for you, but locally sourced yarns and man-made and suiting fibers aren't worth your time. And so again, that made me even more curious about it. And again, of course, we've been fortunate to connect with the Campaign for Wool in a few years back, and you really start to realize there was an ecosystem in Canada that is really closely tied to where things come from, which I think is in all spheres of consumerism these days and capitalism. The closer you are to the products, the better understanding you have of it, and the better connection you have to what you're making. So for us, the fact that there is wool in Canada, there's sheep, there's farmers, there is an ecosystem that has not been fully dismantled, partially due to the meat industry being still relevant. But at the same time, this exists, and at the same time, the garment industry is still here. There's still some processing facilities. So we're at a pinnacle moment now. And this is what I kind of became aware of, in that, these are possible. There'll need to be a lot of work to reinvigorate the supply chain, but it's not like we're starting from scratch. And of course, back to our brand and the products, I mean, if you think of the most to answer the same questions that we were answering before with the polyester stuff, with the acetate materials, to tackle overconsumption, a lot of the climate problems we have, all of these issues that I was trying to tackle from day one, doing so by going back in time to how things were made in the past is actually an ingenious way of doing so, and which was a very interesting kind of observation, kind of how things kind of circle back from the beginning. So if we click the next slide, so this is where we start introducing wool. This is the imported Italian yarn. And then next again, Lydia, sorry. So then I want to bring up this topic as well of the manufacturer's dilemma, which I'm not sure if it's been coined yet, but maybe we can coin it. But as a manufacturer, of course, and because we're vertically integrated, we're in an odd position, because we often make products not because there's a need for them, but because we can. So we look at what can be made as opposed to what actually is needed on the market. And of course, that could lead you to be doing things, especially in Canada, where, say, not everything is currently possible, to be doing things that maybe aren't actually what's fully desirable. And the further the disconnect there is, there's a reality where you'll end up producing things that are wasteful, and we did that at some point. I still have, we've given some away to charity, but we still have some old, prototypes from the beginning, from when we were making man-made suiting, because it was, again, we made it because it was possible. We could do it. The fabric was available. It was cheap. It was good. We had a good sort of business case to do so. But in the end of the day, as a manufacturer, we're also in this kind of positioning where sometimes you're doing things not just because you can do them, and not because you actually should be doing them. And now with wool, I think it's been the opposite process, in the fact that we're kind of now figuring out what actually is desirable, what's the final end product. Natural fibers are amazing. Making sure that they're from Canada would be great. And how do we do that, and then re-engineer it backwards so that we can actually produce it in Canada? So it's really been a kind of a big learning, and coming from the manufacturing side, it definitely has pushed us into a direction that has made us sort of relearn things that we hadn't before. So that's kind of what I'm calling the manufacturing dilemma. But if we go next to the next slide, Lydia. So here's our new sort of rebranded look, I guess. And with the change into wool, and the discovery into the fibers that are available in Canada, has also led us to rethink what classic means and what timeless design means. Just because an item, is minimal, it doesn't need to be boring, right? And that's where I think with wool and the properties of wool, you can make a lot of items that, contain heritage properties, knitting techniques, even just ways of making fabric that, have a lot of character, but don't, and are still minimal and will last generations, because we've seen that they have, but they're not necessarily ultra utilitarian or I guess too similar to a communist era of design, which has its merits, but in theory it also lacks a bit of life, right? So that was also been a bit of a discovery for us. And if you click the next slide, you'll see that, so when we really started with wool, it kind of opened up our eyes into what, how we could tackle the same pillar that we wanted to tackle from day one. And the wool journey, honestly, it's been one where we've had to do a lot of. Oh, we have a question, I think, from Jane. See a hand come up.
Can I manage this myself? No, I can't. Do I just ask my question? I guess so, eh?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Jobair, great. I was just wondering, before you get too far away from the manufacturer's topic, could you just take like 30 seconds and tell us what would be a better scenario for you? What would you need to make manufacturing just a little bit easier? What's the biggest pain point, I guess?
In relation to Canadian wool, or just regarding manufacturing in general?
I would say manufacturing in Canada.
So, I mean, with many industries, I mean, manufacturing is one that has been heavily outsourced with time, right? It's, if you can call it, the dirty jobs of our sort of society, right? Because it's definitely a lot of labor intensivity. They're not highly paid jobs in theory. But of course, what has happened really, and this is what our work with the local government, the STC here, and even in Montreal, has been around creating conversations about what happens when you lose this industry. And when COVID happened, it was a big wake up for, I think, the government, because they realized that it's a very valuable for national security, for in times of crises. It's a very important and critical component to the ecosystem here. And of course, what has sustained manufacturing here has been the uniform world. It's not that, although many designers have contributed to that, but many designers at some point, when they get big enough, say, oh no, let's make it abroad, because the cost structure goes down. So I think we still have a basis here, but I think a lot more needs to be done to sort of, I guess, not educate, but almost like put importance into this, because if we lose it, it's not going to come back. And the problem is, the more we can contain it and we can support this industry, the more it's actually going to improve in the sense of, technological advancements. There's a lot of new machinery that's being developed primarily in Asia. So we're kind of now going through the opposite, I guess, a reversal, in the sense that a lot of the expertise that we once had was shipped away. And now in those places where they're still manufacturing heavily, they've gained this insight and knowledge, and now we have to kind of learn that back, and if we want, essentially, and allow ourselves to improve, because nowadays you can get machines that can do a lot of things that would remove the human factor, which could make it less of a demanding sort of human capital sort of intensive world, and will allow us to at least sustain local brands, government needs that that we're really at a critical point now. So it's across the spectrum, I would say, Jane. Like, it's more and more. I mean, the 2000s, from what I've heard, I wasn't in the industry back then, was devastating when they opened up the free trade agreements and everything left. Manufacturers closed, machines went to waste. Essentially, they were shipped abroad. So if we don't have an existing base that's healthy, the people who are in this industry cannot reinvest and get new machinery, bring in, upskill, young, talented people who are leaving universities, who have some knowledge in this field. And so it's a whole cycle, I think. And And there's industries that still have a high cost of labor, sorry, countries that have a high cost of labor that still have maintained manufacturing, like in Japan and different countries. So it's not impossible. It's just a matter of I think somewhat rebranding what it means to locally manufacture, and how it's actually a very, it could be a very interesting thing for young people to get involved in. I'm often, collaborating with people who are much more senior than me, who are surprised that I'm coming into this industry. And I think it's unfortunate that's kind of the brand around it, because I think, it's a very beautiful thing to be making things, that are physical, and if we don't have control of this, we won't be able to actually change the sort of global agenda on this, because say if we as a country care about the environment and all these things, it all starts from this base, and if we don't have an actual control over that, then we can't really be in the conversation as well as we can in other domains. So
That's great. Thanks, Jobair. That was very eloquently put. I loved your response. So I'm going to unmute now and I'll let you get on with your presentation.
Okay. Amazing. Thank you, Jane. So yeah, we started the Wool Project as kind of like a call to action. Like, let's have this audacious goal of creating a full, garment made of wool in an industrial capacity. And initially when we started, there were a lot of challenges, because we weren't in a community of people who were doing this, and the core of the industry in Canada, at least in Montreal, wasn't sort of positioned to make this project come to life. So a lot of work was done to really do research, figure out where we can find yarn, what the yarn that's available, where is it from, and of course a lot of work now since has been done to sort of do a better mapping of this, and we're now in the process of testing, yarns and the strength of them, and how to get things up to, you could argue, standard of the global standard for garment production. But again, when we started this, it really was like, can we do this? And let's do a basic garment. So we started with essentially what I'm wearing now, which is a very basic, natural sheep's gray sweater, and the same version in white. So again, very, very simple. It's a cut and sewed garment that was knitted out, and it was the first application that we could think of that could kind of be part of this, the project essentially. But since then, we were successful at sort of getting this at least off the grill, you could say. But we've now started to tackle different types of products, and we've done, the toques, we've done different styles, and we're hopefully going to encourage other people to I guess play with this. But one of the problems we're still in now is, of course, there's the cost side of it, and there's the fact that a lot of testing still needs to be done to fully make this a yarn or a material that other designers who maybe are importing just British wool or Italian yarns, or brands globally will even consider, right? So we're still very far from that. And in theory, for this to work fully, we need there to be a bit more scale, because it needs to replace some of the work that other people are doing with the acrylics and man-made yarns. And at the IWTO conference, which I attended, like one of the striking facts was that only close to 1% of garments use wool to begin with. So it makes this sort of this wool project, as you could say, or the use of Canadian wool, kind of an upward battle that requires a lot of people, more hands on deck to really work together and make this a reality, so that this can get through the fence and essentially become a product that can be used widely. And there's a lot to benefit. It's, as I think we all know now here, is on the environmental side, on the side of really also connecting, like this idea of going from farm to garment notion, which I think is a very beautiful thing. And I've been lucky enough now to connect more and more with the farmer side and across the whole supply chain, to see the fact that this could add a lot of value, and it could be something that when you think of there was a video I watched connected to the campaign for wool, where King Charles throws like a garment into the soil, and he throws a polyester one, and he throws a wool one, and then you just look. I think they came. Matthew, maybe you've for sure seen this, but like in a few months after they look, and that the wool one's completely gone back into like it's big, we begun to disintegrate, which is, I think, and the other one is just perfect. It's still as it was, which again is something that we have to consider, in the fact that this is a natural material and we should position towards this. Wool is not the only answer, but it's a core part of, at least as Canadians and being working in Canada, what we can do, because it's something that literally is available and is totally natural. So so if we go next to the next slide, these are the toques that we've done as well. And go next again, sorry. And this is the campaign we shot. So I mean, again, we're just now, a big part of what we're trying to do as a company is really educate the end consumer of, you know, why they should be choosing wool firstly, and then why they should also be thinking maybe locally and as locally as possible. So if you're in, you know, Canada, why Canadian wool could be a very, you know, interesting thing to maybe currently you have to pay a bit more for that, but in the long run you won't. It's like the same argument is used in food with like organic food. Back in the day, organic food was the norm, right? And then all of a sudden, less and less farmers were making organic food, and then at some point now it's way more expensive. You pay a premium for things that you want, and if it becomes the norm, these prices will go down and it will become more and more accessible. But for now, yeah, even for us as a company, this project has not been profitable, and it's one where we strongly believe in and we see the value in it long term. But we've had to sort of put our values before our wallets sometimes, and kind of and do this. And I think it's the same thing on the consumer side, because that's what's really going to dictate this. And like whether people go out and use their money like voting essentially, and they vote for things that they want and values that they want. Yeah, so that's kind of, if we go to the next slide, I think you'll see, here we go. So this is kind of a summary of the current obstacles that we're facing. So lack of consumer knowledge about the wool and Canadian wool. You know, I had conversations with someone the other day who didn't know that merino wool was wool. They thought merino was this other material. So a lack of farmer incentive to provide optimal wool. That's a big thing too. Like most of the farmers in Canada are still positioning, the reason why they have sheep is really for meat, and they either sell their wool at a loss, or they can burn it. Jane can speak better about this, but like this is a problem, right? And we have to create a system where all the farmers are incentivized to really essentially, you know, treat their sheeps as also potential producers of wool. And then that's the way they feed them, the way they clean them, the way they raise them, all of this, so that we can have a final end product similar to how other countries are doing it. Some countries, you know, have where there's farms where the flock is just for wool, and we're so far from that still. But at least we have, for the farmers who do have big flocks and who have sheeps and are using them for meat, at least if they can be educated and incentivized also to raise their sheeps for wool use, then that's a big part of the supply chain that we have to fix. High costs of processing and production, same thing there. I mean, like currently the costs are still much higher, and that's normal. I still think it's normal that things are costing more. It's like with anything, if it's rare and hard to get, and there's not enough infrastructure still in place, then it's going to be something. And this is where my argument is, like, governments have done this. They've subsidized specific aspects of the industry, whether it's on the promotional side or whether it's on just helping with incentivizing development. If we value this as an industry, then technically speaking, yeah, having more interest from the Quebec government specifically in the garment industry for years has been assisting here and there but it's no longer the sexy industry for them. It's no longer like this is critical, and COVID changed that a bit, but it wasn't a lasting effect. Now people are much more, I mean, the government overall, from what I've seen, is more interested in tech and all that kind of stuff. So if we can see a way of merging manufacturing with tech, which I think, you know, I think Liz is on the call here, who's opening up bought a nice machine that's coming in soon, that's very advanced. So that's kind of where I think the future will be, is having the government coming to assist in development of new new technologies around this industry to help it to ease the costs on the end consumer in the end. So yeah, that's the current obstacles. And then if you go next, to the next slide, this is a press release that was made in 2023. Go again, one more slide. So yeah, action points, educating the end consumers on the importance of wool, educating consumers on where their wool comes from, I mean, the traceability of it. And again, like if living in Canada, I think you don't have to go too far before you reach a farm. You get in your car and you'll see that. And I think that's something that, you know, as Canadians, a lot of us are used to nature and all of this. So I think this wool is a very natural thing that I think people can really connect with. And yeah, so I think the more we do that, the better we'll be as part of the education to kind of expose people to the fact that, you know, be transparent, show where everything's coming from. Wave, who I've been collaborating with too on developing fibers and all of this for a fashion show that will come out in May, you know, has been also a pioneer in this and has sort of has hosted workshops for people to come in and get exposed to different aspects of the wool industry, really. And I think the more we do that, the more we get people excited by this, and so it doesn't feel like this far off thing that, you know, which clothing has been seen like that for many years. And once we offshored it, it's very far away. We get this perfectly finished garment that's packaged, that's so cheap, and people go, oh, you don't have to worry about that until a news headline pops up. And of course, yeah, government initiatives. I mean, the Campaign for Wool is a wonderful initiative that, you know, to do this, and the fact that we're hosting this talk here and the series, I think, is very beneficial overall. And the more, of course, we can work together with the systems that are in place, the better it will be for everybody. And I think that's my presentation. So we'll open up for questions, not questioning. But thank you all for listening in.
Fabulous, and thank you, Jobair, for taking the time to speak with us and talk about your amazing journey so far. Your presentation also highlighted the fact that I forgot to mention that you were selected by us to be the keynote speaker at the IWTO conference in Montreal, and you were also gracious enough to open up your manufacturing facility to a visit for the participants from around the world. So we wanted to thank you again for that and for flying the flag for Canadian wool. On that note, before we dive into questions, well, actually, maybe I'll do it as a bit of housekeeping right at the end. Maybe we'll finish questions just a couple minutes before, just so I can give updates on a few other things related to our broader work and our work at the IWTO. But I know we've got a lot of questions. So Lydia, should we hand over to you to pass over, go through some of the questions?
Yeah, please keep your questions coming in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question to Jobair. So far, we have some really lovely comments from Morgan. So there's a fire truck passing in front of my house. Around me in Calgary, there's 3 local wool mills, but there's an issue that they're always at full capacity. Processing times are at least 6 months out. That works for hobbyists, but if you're working on a professional level, it's really tough. The mills also can't keep up their line of different yarns standardized because they never know what colors, quality of wool they'll be receiving from farmers. I don't know if you have any comments on that, maybe Jobair.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's like, as a company that, you know, we don't obviously produce the yarn. We work with the mills to get the yarn, and I think that's something that the current mills are going through now. Is there, I guess they're a lot of the wool yarn production for years has been sustained by hand knitters, right? And a lot of the mills that are around have helped that and continue to help that. And I guess the answer to that, I guess, is sort of maybe creating a more known landscape of what exists, right? Where the mills are, who can process what types of yarn they can process, so that we can kind of work together to see. And then if it requires, you know, one mill to upgrade and to get new machinery, then that could be the case. But I think a bit of that is just kind of mapping and like removing the silos potentially that could help with that problem specifically. Again, I think there's so many factors into it. So I think the mills often have to deal with what comes towards them in terms of the quality of the wool. So that's where I think the inconsistency can happen as well. So we have to kind of create a whole chain where we really see all the steps and we're aware of them, and that's why an end product can look a certain way when it comes out of a mill. But in terms of processing times, yeah, I guess we don't have too many mills, and it's costly to process wool. So the more we could kind of work together to bunch things to again, if every farm wanted to just see a yarn from their own farm, it's definitely harder, I think. It requires a bit more specification, but if for a larger mill to handle, again, I think that's all I'll say, because I'm not an expert in this specific domain. So I'll stop there, and maybe someone else later can jump in, or yeah, we can probably answer it later at a different yarn series.
Thanks for that. We have a question from Simone. Can you comment on the cost of labor and how that impacts your sales price / operations budget?
Yeah, definitely. Cost of, I mean, everything we make requires labor, whether it's the cutting of the fabric, which still is machine cut. There's still humans operating those machines. The knitting is the same thing. It's still human operated. Cutting and actual the sewing is very still manually done, and I don't see that ever being replaced. So, you know, the cost of labor has continued to increase, and for skilled sewers and for engineers to operate machinery, you know, they're of high demand, and there's not a lot of supply for this. So again, it's something that you have to offset onto the end consumer, and we try not to be audacious with margins, but we operate on, you know, just the margins you need to operate the business and cover your costs, right, and make a bit of profit. But again, it's something that in Canada, yeah, we're definitely heavily affected by it. But as I said earlier, I think many countries still operate, you know, thriving garment industries. But if we're going to keep racing to the bottom, then of course we're never going to be competitive on that front, and we don't necessarily want to either. So again, focusing on high quality specifications, not fast fashion, allows for this not to become a big issue. But yeah, and again, in terms of pricing, some items can cost more because they're very labor intensive. And the idea really here comes back to when we started the company back in the day, which is this kind of cost per wear calculation you can do. So the more you're going to wear this, the more years it will last. The more you start to see an item that maybe $350 is a lot, but of course, if you start to compare it to an item that maybe will break or wasn't ethically made, you know, you can start to put it through that equation, and the cost starts to make more sense. But definitely, we're with every industry in Canada that requires a lot of you know, human interaction. I think we're affected by that, and yeah. But of course, the manufacturing world in Canada used to be heavily unionized. It's much different now. A lot of it has fragmented since. So yeah, it's definitely a harder thing to navigate, and it's one where, of course, yeah, we have to keep very high standards if we want to be, you know, considered, and we have to governmentally, we have to keep very high standards too. But there's less of this sort of large industry focus, and it's a lot of highly skilled sewers who exist in say Montreal or Toronto who allow for this to keep going.
Would anyone like to ask any other questions? Maybe if you want to unmute yourself. Oh, we have another one here from Sasha. Do you see Milo and Dexter catering to direct to consumer or B2B or mixed channel? With the base price, yes, so base price for Canadian wool so high, are retailers happy with lower margins?
No, they're not. And that's the thing, you know, because we're a company that makes stuff in Canada, we definitely don't offer, say, the same margins that, say, some brands that, you know, have crazy margins. Like the margins in fashion can be up to 80%, you know, on items, and that's on a wholesale side. So of course we don't operate like that. We can't operate like that. And the reason why we go B2B is because it's more cost effective as a small company to do so, because you then cannot spend as much on marketing and whatnot. But also through the past 3 years of doing so, you realize that that's a very important part of the supply chain. And these are people who are in all over Canada, who own boutiques, whether in small towns, big towns, who are very, very integral part of the supply chain, and they add a lot of value to it. So cutting them out, I don't think is not where we want to be either. I think back in the day when we started, we thought that we would just, think like a small company who would just go direct to consumer, kill everyone, kill the margins. But with time and maturity, I think we realized that no, we want to be part of a value chain. But maybe there are some items that currently are too expensive. So maybe for those ones that it can only be B2C. And those ones will have to kind of wait before the cost will go down so that, retailers can get involved. But we've at times sometimes sent out items, say if it's we have some items coming in fall, winter that maybe we're not actually going to make any money off of it, but it's going to be really good for promoting the message of what we're trying to do with wool. So that's how we kind of factor it. But definitely, I think there's a lot to add in the value chain for keeping the smaller retailers involved. And a lot of them are small business owners who really service their communities that they're in, and the spread is very wide. It's the same thing in the U.S. They have a very similar setup too, and they're facing problems as well currently because many brands have just gone directly to consumer and cut them out, and we don't necessarily want to be a part of that necessarily all the time. So yeah.
Thank you. Morgan, I missed your earlier question. Thanks for retyping it. I'm gonna read the first version. Do you still manufacture most of your products? And do you see manufacturing most of your own products as an important part of your success in the Canadian fashion/wool industry? I see the manufacturing to be my biggest barrier, but I am in Calgary, so it's a bit different.
I don't necessarily think so. I think that to make this work, we're going to have a lot of different people manufacturing, like long term, and specializing. We, for instance, all our cutting is outsourced to another company that has invested heavily in robotic cutting machines, whereas in the past we were using hand cutting machines. So when you start to think of an ecosystem growing in the manufacturing side, ideally specialization does happen, and there's mills that do certain things, certain players who provide value. For now, we do so because it's we're left with less options. So, but if things grow and continue, there will be more subcontractors who grow and exist within this value chain, but it's hard to predict what's going to happen with the manufacturing industry. And like, for instance, as an example, in where we are here in Montreal, like the rents have skyrocketed. It's moved. There's been a big move from manufacturing to tech and to rent spaces as offices. So who knows how long that will last, and if that means creating a new ecosystem in the countryside or somewhere more rural, that's possible. But I don't know. I think there's also needs to be a paradigm shift for this to work, and we need to heavily invest in new machinery very soon if we want to actually sustain this. And that's kind of part of what we're thinking on our side, is like, at what point can we invest in new machinery to allow for an ease on, we're working on some really old machines that we bought up, right, and that existed in this area, but the skill set's going away, and some of them are very archaic machines to operate. So yeah.
Jackie has two questions. First, do you see potential for more careers in sewing, operating knitting machines, or custom knitting in the future? Is this something that we should be sharing with our local youth, for age groups, arts and crafts council members, etc.?
That's a good question. I think like we get interns from LaSalle College here. There's also, I know, a knitting program, I believe, in New Brunswick that teaches how to operate machines. But again, unless we have, it's a chicken and egg problem again too. It's like, unless we have enough jobs to sustain that, the education could go to waste, right? Unless there's very entrepreneurial people coming out who are trying to start something. But again, if you look at like what's available, when people leave schools as sewers or this, unless they're starting something or working at a specific company, and there's not too many companies that still do this. And many of the companies that are there have been around for a long time operate in a different model. They operate with first generation immigrants who come in, who maybe will work off of, say, minimum wages or lower wages that, say, young graduates will not accept to work at. So I think unless we go through that kind of bump in the boom where we can sort of like upgrade our machinery, bring in new stuff, we're going to sort of have that gap. And it's going to be much harder to entice younger people to get involved. But of course, initially we're trying to do that. And as a company, we're trying to do that. But you know, it's definitely an old school environment. And Canada, if you look at the manufacturing industry, I think it looked like probably in the 80s. So there hasn't been a huge change, and that's not so enticing for young people, I think, to get involved in, unless, but it's part of what we want to do, and that's what we want to change, and hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, Morgan and Liz are commenting that they went to the knitting college in New Brunswick.
Okay. Yeah.
Follow-up question from Jackie. Are you seeing more requirements for sustainable as a criteria in fashion shows or in the industry as a whole?
Yeah, definitely. And like, say, Simon's, who's one of our buyers, they're at they have I think a policy by 2025. They're going to be vision. It's called a Vision 2025, where everything needs to be sustainable. This is another problem that I guess I could bring up here too, which is the fact that Canadian wool technically is not considered globally, like there's no certificate on it yet. And I think Matthew has been discussing this idea of getting accreditations on it, but until then, there becomes a system where people go, oh, sustainable. They have these banners like Blue Corporation and all of this, but a lot of it is a bit of there's these global overwatch communities, but whether it means sustainable, I think is somewhat subjective. And but of course, there's a huge trend towards that. It's consumer pushed as well. Consumers are demanding this now. They're, with the way social media works now, there's people are exposing what horrible conditions there are in work environments in specific countries, materials, where we're learning more about what's good and what's bad. I mean, one thing that is interesting is a lot of influencers that we've come across have a misconception on leather. As an example, they say, oh, we want to avoid leather because it's like animal cruelty. But then you start looking into what's being replaced, and it's man-made fibers. It's stuff it's really not good. So there is also misinformation that happens in this world when it comes to like sustainability and green. So I think we have to take a much holistic viewpoint on what that means, and less kind of follow what the trend is, or like canceling people for this or that. I mean, I think we need to be very critical consumers across the board, and as people working in the industry, we also have to be very critical and speak the truth as far as we know it, at least.
Matthew's saying his biggest beef are vegan, quote unquote, products out of plastic.
It was crazy. There was a brand that started. It's all vegan. It's all like, but it's all plastic. And I was like, this is, do you know a lot of leather is a byproduct from the industry, and you can ensure that your leather is a byproduct. And then the lady was like, oh yeah, but the Gen Zs, like they won't believe, they'll cancel me on TikTok. I was like, well, so yeah.
I mean, it still comes from dead animals. It's dinosaurs, so it's over a long enough time frame. Like, it's just, it depends where you cut your line.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not to mention the harm you're causing to the wildlife with the plastics, right?
And that's
on one end, and
of course, it all goes back. It's a very good point. Yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions. Morgan had another comment that there's lots of potential for smaller companies in the space to share skills, spaces, and also the access to machinery. Imagine being able to share the costs and risk of purchasing equipment with people in the same space and mindset.
100%. And I think that's important. And I think we have to see this as less of a it all depends on how you see this, right? Or how are we united, right? And if we all have similar values and similar goals, and we're not just constantly competing, I think that could be an answer. But of course, like like from my experience in the industry, yeah, people are fighting against each other, undercutting people, right? So we have to see the bigger picture. And in the end of the day, like when you're running a business, there's so many costs, and that often moves people away from collaborating, right? Due to like trying to be competitive. But of course, that's a nuanced way of seeing business. And I think the modern day way of business, especially if we're trying to advance things holistically, will be to work together. And that's a very good idea. I think it's something that the SDC locally is trying to do, trying to connect different players in the industry here in Montreal. And but of course, it will take people reaching out and trying to work together so we can save on these costs. And that's kind of what's happening in the wool industry, right? Like with Canadian wool, we're trying to connect it as much as possible and to create a better connection between getting the farmers involved in conversations, so we can really understand what the dynamics are overall.
So much food for thought. Thanks, Jobair. I think we're gonna have to leave it at this, but thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, for answering so many questions. Let's turn it back to Matthew for a couple of updates on our work.
Thank you, Lydia, and thank you, Jobair, for such an engaging presentation. We are really lucky to have you as part of the Canadian wool value chain, and we look forward to working with you on several new projects as well. So we've got that we'll have more to reveal in the not too distant. But thank you again for the risk and that you've taken on, and the leadership role that you play as a manufacturer. Just a few quick notes before we go. We are very close to confirming the date for the next Spinning Yarn speaker series. We're still going back and forth with the speakers, but hope to have a confirmed date for you very soon for May. And I think we also have something really exciting lined up for June as well, linked to a new product announcement that we'll be rolling out at that time. So please stay tuned for that and to take part in those speaker series. The Congress, which is the larger of the two annual meetings of the International Wool Textile Organization, the IWTO, starts next week in Adelaide, Australia. I will be representing the Canadian industry there, and we will be having a special session separate from Spinning Yarns, because we know it might get very niche, but for those who have an interest in what's happening on a global level, we'll be planning a debrief session shortly after that. That'll all be wrapped up after next week. So we'll be having so watch out for on our social media for news of a session to debrief on some of the innovations and latest trends and products that will be presented at that show in Adelaide. I often make the joke that Australia is the Saudi Arabia of wool. They have the most of the good stuff in terms of value, and they have the certainly as an industry is something to be envied, not just in terms of the scope and scale, but also in terms of all the money that they reinvest in themselves in terms of R&D and marketing. It's really quite impressive. So I'm looking forward to being able to see the latest, not just from the Aussies, but from all of our Campaign for Wool partners and other IWTO members that will be participating in those sessions. So please watch out for that. We will also, of course, we have a really exciting program planned for Wool Month. So we will be taking a little break during the summer on our Spinning Yarn speaker series, but we'll come roaring back in the fall with, as you've come to expect, a whole program of activity around October for Wool Month, and including some new Fabric of Canada films that we are in the process of making right now. So again, thank you to Jobair. Thank you to all of our supporters and members. We couldn't do our work without you, and we appreciate the role that each and every one of you play in helping to make Canadian wool the envy of the world. Thank you again, and look forward to speaking to you all soon. Have a great day, everyone.